So Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So I was thinking that uh, rather than just showing pictures, uh, since the pictures are worth 1,000 words, definitely a video will be worth millions of words. So in a short span of time, how much ever can be explained better by the experts themselves. So now we'll be describing uh, the movements of the sun and how the sun revolves around the earth, the geocentric orbit of the sun, along with the different phases of the moon. And there'll be another video talking about that. But just before we get to that, Bhagavatam describes how the sun is connected to this Mount Sumeru and to the Dhruva Loka, or the pole star. And it explains that by giving an example of an ox oil pressing machine. So there you can see on the slide. So that is the first axis, which is connected from the sun right to the summit or the base of Mount Sumeru. And the second axis, which is about a quarter, somewhere around the quarter of the first axis, about 3.4, 3.8 million yojanas. From there, it is connected to the Dhruva-loka. So here we can visualize. But you can see that the second axis, which is actually the earth, which is actually where the earth is placed, is it's a little too dramatic. So let's just correct that. Yeah. So now it has been corrected for an inclination of 23.5 degrees, which is what is the correct value. So this is how we picture it. Now, this is the annual orbit of the sun around the earth. So of course, we have this question of how do we see the change of seasons? So science used to explain that when the earth would revolve around the sun, because of its tilt or inclination, when it would be on one portion where it's tilted closer to the sun, at that point of time, the northern hemisphere would experience summer, and the winter would take place in the southern hemisphere, and vice versa when it's on the other end of the orbit. Now, with the same ecliptic path which is maintained of the sun, just that we have now made the sun revolving around the earth, which is just a question of relativity. So here, the seasons are maintained with Uttarayana and Dakshinayana. Now, what exactly is that would be explained better in the video. I wouldn't want to waste time explaining that now. And the demigods, they maintain the order daily and annually within the borders of the Manasottara mountains. So as we all know, the Manasottara mountain, it's about somewhere in the middle. And on top of the Manasottara mountain is the axis, the orbit of the sun. And located on the Manasottara mountain are these four cities of these Lokapalas or Dikpalas. Just a moment. So I was just trying to grab this piece of paper which mentions the names of all these important cities. Right in the north, we have, well, in this diagram it shows the opposite, but let's just assume it's talking about the east. So as per this image, we are looking at east over here. Then we are looking at, so naturally we'll have north and south and west. So We have in the north, we have the city of moon god, which is known as Vibhavari. Then we have Devadhama, residence of Indra, which is in the east. We have Nimloka, which is residence of Varuna. And then in the south, Samyamani, residence of Yamaraj. So this is a familiar name, Samyamani. This is a small bonus question. So whoever can answer this towards the end of the session, I'll be very happy. So the question is, in which pastime of the Lord is this place mentioned, Samyamani? So the orbit of the sun is maintained just like the chariot wheel, which is divided into the 12 zodiac signs. And the sun travels annually through the zodiac. Now it's very interesting. The sun travels with Mount Meru on its left. So it's actually traveling from east to west, and it's traveling in an anti-clockwise manner. But as per the zodiac, the sun travels in a clockwise manner. So Parikshit Maharaj, when he heard this from Shukadev Goswami, he got confused. He's like, how do you explain this? So that time, Shukadev Goswami, he talks about the theory of relativity much, much before Einstein. And he gives the example of a potter's wheel. And he gives the example of how a potter's wheel moves in one direction and there are ants on the wheel which are moving in another direction. So from the perspective of the ants, they're moving backwards. But actually, sorry, from the perspective of the ants, they're actually moving forward. But if you see the whole picture, you will actually notice that the ants are moving backwards along with the potter's wheel. So this is a question of relativity. And it's also explained as retrograde motion because the angular velocity of the ants is much less compared to the angular velocity of the potter's wheel. So similarly over here, both the sun and the moon are much slower compared to the Kala or the zodiac signs, which is represented like a wheel placed above the sun, the orbit of the sun and the moon, somewhere near the 27 nakshatras. So, well, this is an ancient instrument which was used for navigation, where they had the sun placed on an orbit above. So now we're getting into the vertical aspect. So naturally, we can see that the sun is actually above the Bhumandala up to a certain height. Surya Siddhanta placed the sun at about 93 million miles and about 0.8 million miles above the plane of Bhumandala. The moon's orbit physically close to the earth, but it's vertically quite far up from the sun. So at this point, I would like to play the second video of the sun.
Yeah, just a minute, Sanjay.
The Vedas give amazing information about the sun. Do you know what energy runs the sun? Is it nuclear fusion? Is it volcanic energy? The Vedas say it is water. Yes, water. The sun evaporates water from all over the creation and uses it as fuel, just as lightning uses moisture. Modern science knows that sunlight contains many types of rays, such as ultraviolet, infrared, gamma rays, X-rays, etc. The Vedas describe that sunlight contains 100,000 different types of rays, each possessing specific subtle properties. Just as in a house, electricity regulates coolness, heat, light, sound, etc., so the sun's rays control heat and cold, day and night, summer and winter, darkness and light throughout the universe. The Vedic geocentric model explains how the sun moves around the pole star, situated vertically above Earth's north pole. As the sun goes around the Earth globe, we experience day and night. The stationary Earth, unlike the pole star, does not revolve on its own axis, though it is slightly tilted toward the pole star. During summer in the northern hemisphere, the North Pole experiences 6 months of daylight. Conversely, during summer in the southern hemisphere, the South Pole experiences 6 months of daylight. These 6-month periods correspond to a day and night for the demigods living in the heavenly planetary system. Vedic cosmology accounts for this phenomena by the vertical motion of the sun, technically called Uttarayana and Dakshinayana. The sun moves upward on an incline for half a year, and then downward for the next half. This motion produces two effects on Earth, namely the changing of the seasons and the varying durations of day and night. Ordinary vision sees the sun to be a mere globe of fire. However, celestial vision reveals a personality residing over the sun. His name is Vivasvan, and he rides on a golden chariot pulled by 7 divine horses at a speed of 16,000 miles per second. The chariot has one wheel which moves on celestial Manasotara mountain. The horizontal shaft is linked to the axial hub of the universe, Mount Meru, and the diagonal shaft is linked to the pole star. With each circular path, the wheel gradually moves laterally inward for 6 months and then outward for 6 months. Similar to the chariot's vertical motion, this lateral action fine-tunes seasonal changes on Earth. When the orbital motion of the sun is viewed from above, its illumination is seen to extend out to half of the greater Earth plane. During its orbit, the sun passes over the 4 cities situated in the 4 cardinal directions. The city over which the sun is passing experiences noon, and the city in the opposite direction experiences midnight. The 2 other cities experience sunrise and sunset. The zodiac is a conceptual celestial plate encompassing the entire sky. Like the face of a clock, the zodiac is divided into 12 divisions of 30 degrees each, called signs of the zodiac, or rashis. Each named according to the constellation of stars residing within them. These signs serve as a set of reference markers for measuring the movements of the moon, sun, and the planets. The zodiac completes one clockwise revolution of 360 degrees in every 24-hour period. The moon travels through the zodiac, but due to its slower angular velocity, it completes only about 347 degrees in 24 hours, falling behind by about 13 degrees. The day after the new moon day, we see one moon phase. The next day, the moon again completes 347 degrees, and we see the moon in its second phase. In this way, the moon appears to travel in the opposite direction through the zodiac. This is also called retrograde motion. Thus, the phases of the moon increase each day for 15 days until the full moon. Then the moon's phases decrease gradually by one phase each day until the dark moon night. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes the vertical positions of the planetary orbits. First above the Earth plane is the Sun at a height of 0.8 million miles. Next higher comes the Moon at 1.6 million miles, followed by the Nakshatras, 28 stars, at twice the height, then Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Saptarishi constellation, and then finally the pole star at a height of 30.4 million miles. Although the Sun is 0.8 million miles above the Earth plane, its horizontal distance from the Earth is much greater. Although varying with the seasons, the mean Earth-Sun distance works out to be approximately 100 million miles. 80,000 miles below the Sun is a dark or invisible planet named Rahu. When this planet comes between Earth and the Sun on the new moon day, or Amavasya, while the moon is in the same conjunction or straight line, a solar eclipse takes place. The eclipse is full for those on Earth who are situated in line with the conjunction, while others may see it partially. Similarly, when Rahu comes between the Earth and the Moon on the full moon day, or Purnima, while the Sun is in the same conjunction, a lunar eclipse takes place. This is seen by anyone on Earth who can see the Moon. The eclipse is either full or partial depending on the movement of Rahu. At least 5,000 years ago, the Vedas were able to predict eclipses precisely. This science is still used today with the same extraordinary accuracy.
So I hope that makes sense. Of course, we will discuss this in greater detail towards the end. Now, I would like to describe what is exactly on that chariot of the sun god. So it is described that when Hanuman was about the age where he could attend Gurukul, so his parents were deciding on where to send him, just like how my parents are deciding now where to send Saksh. So they decided to send him abroad to the sun god for education. So now sun Surya, while he is also doing this service of revolving around the earth, at that time he is also teaching, he is also imparting knowledge. So he is imparting knowledge to about 60,000 sages whose name is, as per Bhagavatam, about Valikhilias. And they stay in front of the sun god. They are all seated in that chariot, along with Aruna, who's the chariot driver, who's actually facing the sun god, uh, although the horses are behind him. And then there are other sages, there are Gandharvas, Apsaras, Nagas, Yakshas. They're all in different groups and they're present in that chariot and they're performing rituals and they're performing worship to Surya Dev. And we know the speed of the sun, which is about 16,000 miles per second. So Hanuman, uh, he was dedicated. He wanted to learn from Surya Dev. So he decided that I will fly at the same speed of the sun, and at the same time I will hear everything that the sun god has to say. So Vivaswan or Surya Dev, he said, well, when I'm imparting you the knowledge, then you will have to face me uh, and receive that knowledge. So Hanuman, he said, okay, no problem. And he started flying backwards along with the chariot. Now, these stories seem very fascinating, but the details, as per Bhagavatam, they kind of coincide, they correspond with modern science. So no one can deny the speed of the sun, no one can deny the distance of the sun, and all these distances which are already uh, given thousands and thousands of years back. So if we can accept those details, then why not accept these stories? So that is how incredible the speed of the sun is. So now we come towards the next portion. The subterranean heavenly planets, also known as Bhilla Swarga. So it is said that as if you kind of dig below the earth, the surface, and simultaneously if you move outwards or downwards towards the south, you will notice, you will come across these planetary systems: Atala Loka, Vitala Loka, Sutala Loka, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala, along with Pitra Lokas. So this is located somewhere between the Garbhodaka Ocean and the Bhumandala. It's below the Bhumandala. So I've pointed it over there for everyone's convenience. Let's zoom in. So what is present in each and every planet? Now these are not the hellish planets yet. Everyone has a confusion that all these lower planets are hellish planets. No, they are not. Of course, they are much lower in standard uh, compared to the Earth, and mostly people who reside in this region belong to a lower consciousness, a more grosser. Uh, uh, they're dominated by grosser elements, but nevertheless, these places are remarkably pretty modern compared. They're pretty advanced compared to the Earth planet itself. Starting with Atala, uh, where there is a description. Now I'm talking about highlights. There are a lot of features which are somewhat similar in all these places. One of the features is that uh, because it's below the sunlight, it's below Bhumandala, or sort of underneath the earth. So the sunlight or the sun's rays cannot really penetrate through. So this place is mostly dark and it's lit up with electricity, some form of electricity, or with the jewels of the Nagas who are present in these planets. So starting with Atala, here mentioned there are different kinds of heavenly women who are present here, who act like prostitutes. And then in Vitala, there is a mention of Lord Shiva present. And the people here, they live very opulently. Uh, by the blessing of Lord Shiva and Bhavani, they receive a lot of gold called Hataka gold, which is spewed from the mouth of Agni, and they deposit around this land. So all this gold is worn by all these inhabitants. And below that is Sutala Loka. So when Vamandev had pierced the universe by raising his leg, that time he pushed Bali Maharaj beneath the earth to this very place. But because Bali Maharaj happens to be a great devotee of the Lord, so uh, Vamandev awarded him a very beautiful palace in Sutala Loka. So unlike all the other places, Sutala Loka is kind of nice because we have Bali Maharaj and Vamandev himself is present there as the gatekeeper. But overall, these are not really great places to visit. In Vitala, uh, as I mentioned, Lord Shiva is present with all his associates, which are ghosts and Rakshasas and Yakshasas. So as you can see, they're all present around him. Now in Talatala, there is the great architect Maya Danava. So Maya Danava, there are two great architects which are mentioned in the Vedic scriptures. One is Vishwakarma, of, who builds all these beautiful, incredible things for the demigods, or sometimes even for the demons. And then we have Maya Danava, who is an architect from for the Danavas or the Daityas, and he builds all these incredible cities, all these palaces, these aircrafts, spacecrafts, as such. So Maya Danava, he has designed, sort of architected this whole city of Talatala as well as Atala, and various other things. So we have seen in Mahabharat, there is this portion of Indraprasth, this mystical palace of Indraprasth. So that palace was constructed by Maya Danava. So he resides in Talatala, and it's a pretty modernized city. It's way advanced, way beyond where we are at the moment, technologically. It's it's highly sophisticated, and at the same time, uh, it it has all these flying machines, aircrafts, as such. And then as we go lower, we have Mahatala, where we have all these nagas, serpent-like creatures, who are shape-shifting creatures. So I wouldn't fancy going there, but uh, there's a description of nagas in almost uh, anywhere you can see. Like there is a description in the Krishna book itself of Kaliya Naga, who was a snake, this thousand-hooded serpent. Uh, and he had somehow entered into the Yamuna, and Krishna then drove him away. So these beings, they look like snakes, they look like dragons, kind of people, but their wives are human-like, almost like a mermaid, you could say. So the front half could be like a female, and then as you go bottom, it's more like a snake, so like a mermaid, as you can see in the paintings of Kaliya Nag. So these people, they exist in Mahatala, headed by Vasuki. So there is an interesting mention. I was doing my research for this. I came across this very interesting uh, connection with our Vedic philosophy as well as the history in other cultures. So in Ireland, way back, this is somewhere early 1700s or 1800s, where they have these books, uh, these they mention all these, they have these pictures and drawings of serpent-like creatures who used to exist in that portion of the land. And I'm assuming as the age passed on, so all these creatures, they somehow moved from present-day Ireland down to Mahatala. So that's where they reside today. But it's very common that we would find mentions of such creatures in places, and all of them, they live in fear of Garuda, all these snakes, because Garuda feeds on snakes and fishes. And in all these regions, time is not a question because they don't see the passing of the sun, but all of them are fearful of the Sudarshan Chakra of the Lord. And just by the thought of the Sudarshan Chakras, many of the wives of the Daityas, they abort or they have a miscarriage. So I came across this image of the uh, the Talatala Loka, and I began to immediately, it brought me a parallel of something which is very recent. So those of y'all who have been reading the newspaper, y'all have seen how the west part of the United States has been stuck in this wildfire situation, this forest fire, which has been spread towards San Francisco from Erie and Oregon. So I thought, the description is strikingly similar with that of Talatala. It's both modernized, not to the extent as this picture, but definitely there is some resemblance. The sky, which is covered with the smoke, or with the earth, and the sun cannot penetrate through, and the hue of orange and red, it kind of resounds all over the place, because the Nagas, they have jewels on their head which brighten the whole space. So it gives this ambience, uh, this orange kind of light. It's not very pleasant to see, but that's how it looks. So this is how, if anyone has to picture how these subterranean heavenly planets would look like, it's always going to look like this. So although it may be advanced, maybe strikingly more beautiful than the heavenly planets even, yet it's not that beautiful a sight. And these are all real pictures. This is far worse somewhere more inland. So in Rasatala, we have all these demons, all the Daityas, who are the sons of Diti. They reside in this portion of land, in caves like rats, in caves and mountain caves and all. So it's mentioned that in Satya Yuga, there was this fight between, sorry, this fight between the demigods and the demons. And at that point of time, they had this truce, and they sort of debated and came to a conclusion that let's have this competition of churning the ocean, the milk ocean. And that's how this whole episode happened of Rahu. And eventually, the demigods, they received the nectar and they defeated the demons. And ever since, all the demons, they have left all the upper planetary systems, and they have uh, taken shelter of Rasatala. So they hide in this planet, in mountains and caves like rats. And then below that is Patala, where all these Nagas are present. Uh, so one there's another instance where Arjuna was taking bath in the Ganges, and all of a sudden this Naga woman, she just comes out of the water and pulls him down all the way to this region of Patala, and where you have such beings present with jewels on their head. They look they look pretty scary, uh, almost like snakes. Her name happens to be Ulipi, and Arjuna, instead of rejecting her, he decides to get married to her and have their family as an ally. So, and there's another instance of Bhima, who was also pulled down to Patala. And over there, he met his forefathers who gave him nectar to sort of neutralize the poison. Now, much below the even Patala, much below Patala, is the planets for the Pitris. There are two locations for the Pitris, as given in the Srimad Bhagavatam and various other books. One for all those pious ancestors, they have a location on the other side of the moon. So there is a side which is reflected, which we see, which is the light that falls from the earth on the face of the moon. So that portion is occupied by demigods. But the other side of the moon, which we don't see, is occupied by all the Pitras, the ancestors. Uh, And then all the way down, we have another planet for the Pitras, where we have Yamaraj, and all these ancestors, they live there. And then much below that is the hellish planet. And below the hellish planets, we have this Lord Ananta, who is expanded as the thousand-hooded snake, the serpent, with jewels and tongue, which is like bluish in color. And he balances this entire Bhumandala, this whole universe, all the planetary systems above his hoods, and it feels like a mustard seed, as it's described in Bhagavatam. So, before I show um, these portions of slides, I would like to play the final video.
For balancing the greater Earth. Below the earthly planetary system are 7 subterranean realms named Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Drasatala, and Patala, which do not receive sunlight and which are inhabited primarily by demoniac living entities. To reach the first one must go 80,000 miles downward through underground tunnels. At successive depths of 80,000 miles are the remaining 6 netherworlds, all of which are fully developed underground civilizations. In the 4th level downward, Talatala Loka, lives the magical architect Mayadanava, who has designed many brilliantly decorated cities where proud materialists reside. Below the netherworlds are the 28 hellish planetary systems. The demigod of justice, Yamaraj, judges the unrighteous human beings after their deaths and sends them to one of these planets. There, errant souls are administered appropriate punitive measures corresponding to their misdeeds. The earthly and subterranean planetary systems rest upon one of the hoods of the gigantic divine serpent, Shesha. Shesha, in turn, is held up by the colossal transcendental tortoise, Kurma. And Kurma resides in the ocean that fills half the universe.
So now we are going to the hellish planets, only in the presentation, so don't worry. So below the Pitraloka is these hellish planets. Now Bhagavatam mentions about 28 hellish planets, and I'll spare you the details, but it's pretty evident that these are but places of suffering after our life, which is concluded on earth. And at the end, as we proceed, so the hellish realms are below the lower planetary systems, and it's the lowest level in terms of the various placements of all these planets. It's the last uh, stage. So as I showed this image before, our different activities ultimately decide where we are supposed to go. So those who have lived a sinful life towards the end, as it's explained in the Bhagavad Gita, thus perplexed by various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions, they become too strongly attached to sense enjoyment and they fall down into hell. So they are taken in their subtle bodies uh, to the hellish planets, to the Pitraloka. So they are not yet in hell yet. So they reach Pitraloka, and over there, Yamaraj is along with Chitragupta. They sort of decide the destination, the ultimate destination, and the kind of punishment for the particular soul. And as per the judgment, accordingly, as you can see, uh, this is, people would mostly see what catches the eye, but let me just show you what you all are not seeing. Uh, so starting from here, what we see is right in center of us, but what we don't see is all behind us are all these people standing in line waiting for their turn. It's endless, almost going for miles and miles, this treacherous stretch, uh, waiting for their turn of punishment. And as they drag all these people, it's almost it's almost a journey of about 14 days, and there are all these horrible creatures, uh, ghost-like creatures, and all these yamadutas, and there is a person who's constantly striking you with a whip, and all these strange creatures trying to eat your flesh. So you're given this body uh, which sort of bears the pain, which is meant to give you more pain. So it artificially creates pain. So here, there are about 28 hellish planets, and I'm not going to describe all of them. I'll spare the details, as it's too ghastly. If those of you all who are interested can read it in the Bhagavatam. It's about it's in the 26th chapter, the last chapter. Uh, there given are all the 28 hellish planets, their descriptions. And it kind of sums up in this image right here, and also in this image. There are various, as per the descriptions of Bhagavatam, whatever the suitable images that I could find, these are some of the punishments. However, at the time of death, those who remember the Lord, certainly the Lord sends his servants to deliver the person. So here's an instance of Ajaman, who by mistake at the time of death, he was calling for his son, Narayan, and they were challenged by the four messengers, the four servants of Narayan. Now, however, uh, remembering the Lord at the time of death is quite difficult. Uh, it's not as easy as it may seem, because someone may have a philosophy. Okay, let me just devote my life like a jamun, where I can have the the entire first half filled with enjoyment, and towards the last, I will focus on uh, worshiping the Lord. So that's a foolish mentality. If a small experiment, I'm just kind of deviating here, a small experiment for everyone to conduct on themselves. Whenever you're in a situation where you panic, your first thought at that time would be your last thought when you're dying. So I'm saying this out of what I've heard and out of a personal experience as well. So usually, when you're dying, it's the most an exaggerated experience of your life, and at that point of time, what you remember is usually the kind of thoughts you receive when you're in a panicked or aggravated state. So if you're not remembering the Lord at those times, then it's what to speak of when you're actually dying. So that's a small experiment for us to know where we are. At least for me, I haven't gotten there yet, because as we all know, this movement is it's basically practice. Death is the final exam, and chanting is preparation for that exam. So the more you prepare, the more is the likelihood of us doing well in that exam. Also, there is a description of those devotees who put on a tilak, and this mark on the forehead. Uh, the Yamadutas usually stay away from such people because the Yamaraj has given them specific instructions that these are the devotees of the Lord, and only the Yamadutas would come, only the Vishnu Dutas would come and take and deliver these devotees. So stay away. Uh, Keep your ropes away from such people. So now that all that, the crazy, the more ghastly parts are over, now let's go to the more nicer realms. So as we all know, all these distances, as it's given in the cover, what are these distances? Can anyone tell me what are these distances? Are they physical distances?
No, Prabhuji. No, Prabhuji.
Could you mute yourself, Prabhu? Yeah. So Amit Prabhu said no, and that in fact is the correct answer. These are but distances that you're meant to cover only with your subtle body. These are distances uh, for advanced space travel through the subtle body. And only through your subtle body can you access all these regions. So as we discussed, there are heavenly realms within the earthly planets, the Bhauma Swarga, with beautiful lands, and it's occupied by religious and cultured people. See, I forgot. I forgot while selecting the image that this thing had an electric pole. Uh, Heavenly planets don't have electric poles. My bad. But let's focus on the scenery, because that kind of exacts those details. So let's just board on, and let's just get on an aircraft, and let's just visit all these higher realms with our subtle bodies, starting with Bhuvar Loka. So about 2 billion miles. I'm sorry, not 2 billion. If it's yeah. So this distance is about 2 billion miles. This whole stretch, and we are talking about. We are trying to zoom in to this region. So there you could see the Loka Loka mountains in this region, and beyond that the Aloka Varsh. And we are now going to talk about this portion. So this portion from the earthly planets to the Dhruva Loka is known as Bhuvar Loka. No, I'm sorry. The Bhuvarloka, I'm sorry, I made a mistake with my drawing. Bhuvarloka is from the earthly planets to the sun. And starting from the sun to the pole star is Swargaloka. So we are talking about Bhuvarloka. So this drawing is incorrect, as from the sun onwards are all the heavenly planets. But let us uh, let us understand all the planets that are included in Bhuvarloka. So the space is between the Earth and all these planets between the Earth and the Sun. It's known as Antariksha. And within this space are all these other heavenly planets. So we are introducing Rahu, as we discussed in the previous session. Uh, we all know the origin of Rahu. And below Rahu are the uh, the planets for Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, and Yakshas. So it's described. uh, all these Gandharvas are people who are very skillful in all the musical instruments, and uh, the music of the Gandharvas is something we have never heard. The people of the earth have never heard of. So these are very skillful people. In fact, they are called from all over to perform concerts in heavenly realms and in the gardens of Mount Meru and in all these planetary systems. And they have very beautiful planets, and all of them are uh, they're born pilots. I feel jealous. They all have their own little spacecrafts. There is a mention of King Chitraketu, uh, who was in the sixth canto, who visited, I think, Kailasha, where Lord Shiva was speaking to all his associates. And there you see Chitraketu, he's flying in his aircraft. So those things, they don't look like modern aircrafts because they don't rely on air. They rather rely on sort of imitating or sort of changing gravity around them. But there's mention of uh, this Gandharva who was flying in his aircraft, and while he was flying, there was Devahuti in her terrace. She was playing with all her girlfriends. And this is mentioned in the third canto of Bhagavatam. And this Gandharva, he looked at Devahuti and he fell off from his aircraft. Looks like he forgot to put on his seatbelt. He may have banked too much. So some of these places, they are highly advanced with floating cities almost. And below the Gandharva Loka is the lokas for the Kinnaras and Vidyadharas and Yakshas. These are all advanced humans, but rather of a higher consciousness. And below that is the realms for the Yakshas. And below the realm of the Yakshas is the realm for Rakshasas and ghosts. So as per Bhagavatam, it is described in the 24th chapter that below the Siddha Loka, the Charana Loka, Vidyadhara Loka, Gandharva Loka, there is this extended portion of space of about from the limits of Bhumandala or the earth, which is about 100 yojanas or 800 miles above the earth. We have the residence for all these Rakshasas and ghosts. The limits of Bhumandala it's said to be, it extends as high as where the swans or hawks, eagles, and similar larger birds, they fly. And above that is said to be the realms of all these ghosts, which is pretty interesting. And of course, we cannot see them because they're more subtle. So this is where you would find all these ghosts residing in space. And very interesting, the orbit of the International Space Station is about, it's close to about 200, 230, 250 miles from the surface of the Earth. So I was just thinking, oh, they may be haunted every now and then by all these ghosts floating around in space. Moving forward, moving upwards, we have the Dhruvaloka and the pole star. This is an image by NASA, and it just got me thinking, all these planetary systems. This is the pole star, and I was just thinking what could be these planetary systems. So we will get to that. So the pole star is said to be like the pivot. It's said to be the hub, the axis. And connected to the pole star are all these luminaries, these constellations. They're all connected to the pole star, and they're tied with the ropes of air known as pravaha. All the planets, all the stars, the nakshatras, and they revolve around the pole star. And even the pole star itself, which is fixed in its place, it revolves. And that way it turns all these planets. They revolve. And Dhruvaloka is about 3.8 million yojanas above the sun. It's about the quarter of the height between the Dhruvaloka and the sun is about quarter the distance of the sun. As you can see, this is the Shishumar dolphin, and that also kind of rotates around the pole star. So the pole star, or the Dhruvaloka, which is originally the abode of Kshirodakshai Vishnu, was gifted to Dhruva after he perfected his meditation. And just a 5-year-old boy who had advanced and perfected his meditation to that point where Lord Vishnu, in his form as Prishni Garbha, he appears and he places his conch shell on the head of Dhruva Maharaj. And at that time, Dhruva Maharaj speaks the shloka. And that shloka simply translates that I was meditating all this while, just thinking of broken pieces of glass. But what you have offered me, my dear Lord, is a diamond. It's Matirna Krishne Paratasvatova Mitho Vipatyeta Grihavritana Adanta Gobir Vishatanta Mishram Punah Punah Charvita Charvanana. So this Dhruvaloka also has an ocean of milk. And this is the same place where all the demigods, they approach Kshirodakshai Vishnu whenever there is a situation. And this is where they approach the Lord at the time of crisis. All these demigods. And they don't directly communicate with the Lord, as it's described in the Krishna book. They communicate with Brahma, and Brahma, he communicates with the Lord through meditation, and the Lord responds back by speaking to him in his heart. And then Brahma, he relates this information to all the demigods. So it's not very informal. It's very it's quite hierarchy based. So as you can see, this milk ocean, and usually Kshirodakshai Vishnu, at such times of crisis, he himself incarnates. So all these 10 incarnations that we know of, they kind of appear from Kshirodakshai Vishnu, except for some entities that come from the spiritual world directly. So the demigods don't go directly to Krishna, just like how when we have a complaint, we don't go to the CEO of the company. We rather approach the managers. So Kshirodakshayi Vishnu would be the person where they go to, and all the incarnations they come, except personalities like Lord Ram or Lord Krishna, who descend from their own realms, from the spiritual world directly, and hence they're worshipped as the Supreme Lord. They're non-different, and they come directly. Even Nrsimhadev, in some instances, he descends directly from Vaikuntha, and hence we worship Nrsimhadev. So these are some concept arts of the palaces. Again, uh, very divine, it's celestial. It's much advanced, more beautiful compared to the subterranean heavenly planets, with huge castles and palaces on hilltops. And Dhruvaloka is particularly special. It's more beautiful than any of the planets you would find. It's more beautiful than Lord Brahma's planets, the Satyaloka. And the amazing thing is this planet, it doesn't get destroyed in the partial dissolution or the pralaya, which happens consequently, but this planet ultimately gets destroyed at the Mahapralaya. So at the completion of all the 71 cycles, that is when Dhruvaloka would completely get destroyed. Moving forward, so this is how Dhruvaloka would look like. Beautiful heavenly gardens, all palaces made purely of gold. And as we move up, we go to Maharloka. So these are places which is this is the place where all these ascetics and sages, after living a life of renunciation and meditation, they are given this heavenly realm. So when there are likes of people like mentions of Bhrigu Muni in this region. So Bhrigu Muni is that same personality who concluded, who came to conclusion who is the supreme by going and kicking all Lord Shiva, Brahma, and then finally Vishnu. And by seeing the way Lord Vishnu treated him, he concluded that, Lord Vishnu must be the supreme personality of Godhead. So Bhrigu Muni, he occupies this planet along with many other sages, including some siddhas. Although you would find some siddhas located much below in the planetary systems like Bhuvarloka, but here we have even more advanced siddhas. So there is I think in the 11th canto or the 12th canto, there are descriptions of all these mystic siddhis that one acquires with meditation, which you can think of like superpowers, like flying or altering gravity, walking on water like Jesus, or able to sort of get through a wall. Those of you all who were present in the day before yesterday's session, I discussed about two siddhis, Durdarshana and Durshravana, which are present in Sanjaya. So you can think of them like wizards, sorcerers as such, who have some mystical powers. And there are even some people who are present on earth. Even in this present day, there are people you'll find who have such mystic siddhis, and they live on earth. There is a mention of even Nikola Tesla, who was a scientist, well-known, renowned scientist, who was said to have some mystic siddhis. So these are really beautiful lands with amazing sceneries, beautiful forests, amazing landscapes. Yeah, it's very serene. And moving up to Janaloka. Here, the method of worship is by performing uh, yagas, fire sacrifices for thousands and millions of years. And finally, towards the end, Lord Vishnu would personally come and accept the offerings and give his darshan to all the inhabitants. This is also the place which is occupied by Daksha Prajapati. Perhaps that could be a story for another day. But because of some incident that happened, which I will not describe right now, because of some incident that happened between Daksha and his daughter. So Mahadev, he plucked out a piece of hair and he threw it on the ground, and there came this very ferocious, ghastly looking demon, almost like Rudra, and he went and he beheaded Daksha, and that's how Daksha has this goat-like face, which was grafted on his head by Vishwakarma. So Prajapatis are those people who are meant for reproducing and bringing the human population and various other populations. They're meant to, their only mission is to reproduce and bring life. And they are the sons of Manu. So here is a mention of one of the Prajapatis. And moving forward is Tapaloka. And these are even more advanced realms where the process of worship is by meditating on Paramatma, the Paramatma aspect of the Lord. So here, all these mystic sages, they would, who have already perfected their meditation and who are not interested in enjoying the heavenly realms, they prefer to go to a more higher realm, and they want to continue their meditation. And this planet kind of offers variety to all these people. It's kind of customized as per the needs of these sages. It is said that at one point of time, the earth was so occupied because all these different sages, they would go and book a mountain for meditation. They would occupy one entire mountain. So there is even a mention of Pulastya, sage, who wanted to bring Govardhan and use Govardhan Hill for meditation. So as the earth was getting crowded, there came this need for having a planet to serve the purpose for all these different sages. So the good thing, the advantage of these different planets is that the sages, if they think of a beautiful scenery, if they visualize a scenery in their head, let's say if they visualize a mountain or beautiful trees, it kind of manifests and materializes for them. So they can kind of tailor their own experience, their location from their mind, and it kind of materializes through the power of their meditation. And they are very happy by seeing the result of their meditation, and they perfect their lives. And towards the end, like if someone visualizes a beautiful fantasy land with beautiful trees and flowers, so it kind of materializes for you in this planetary system. And they kind of meditate here, and towards the end of their life, the Lord himself comes and delivers. So some really beautiful locations. And finally, moving up to Satyaloka. This is where Lord Brahma is said to reside. And this is also incidentally the same location where the lotus flower, which appears from the belly of Garbhodakshai Vishnu, is said to be positioned. So from here, Brahma, he administrates, he takes care, he maintains this universe under the direction of the Lord. And here, all the living entities who visit this portion of the planetary system, they live for tens of trillions of years, just like Brahma. And this is the highest form of, the highest standard of life within the universe that the demigods can offer to all of us. Like, we can never perceive what enjoyment would be like in all these different planetary systems. It's beyond our sense perception. This is also the place where Brahma instructs Narada on the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. And almost we are talking about the extent of beauty for the material creation. It kind of exceeds when we are talking about Satyaloka, with some really beautiful realms, with floating cities and floating mountains. The civilizations on those mountains, with fountains that are flowing from those floating mountains. And below are all those clouds. So just like in the movie Avatar, how they had these floating mountains, so one can visualize. And with some sophisticated spacecrafts. So that's Satyaloka. So as we move up and down the universe, we are influenced by three things: consciousness, distance, and time. So we spoke of distance, we spoke of consciousness in the first lecture. And time is equally influenced. So just like how this triangle represents, so as we go up, the time kind of shortens relative to the time on Earth. So to explain that, let's take this example. So 5 minutes in heaven, we are talking about Swargaloka, would be about 5 years on Earth, or it could be 10,000 years in hell. So time, that's how time changes for all these different planetary systems. There is a mention, two instances in fact, I'll give you both. One of Maharaj Revat, who took his daughter Revati to fix a marriage, and he was looking for a suitable boy, a groom. So he went to consult with Brahma, and this is sometime in Satyuga. And when he went to consult with Brahma, so Brahma, his assistants sort of told him that just wait for a few moments, Brahma will be right with you. And those few moments ended up being all the two yugas passed. So by the time Maharaj Revat got back to the earth, it was already Dwapar Yuga. And they ended up fixing Revati's marriage with Balaram. And there was this another instance of Indradyumna Maharaj, who had built this Jagannath temple in Puri, which was built in Satyuga. And he had gone to invite Brahma. And by the time he got back, it was already Kali Yuga, and all his descendants had already passed away. So this is how time works in all these realms. Also, the different modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, how they are dominated in all these planetary systems. So we are somewhere in the middle, and this is how we are dominated kind of equally with goodness, passion, and ignorance. And we have an opportunity to increase either the goodness or ignorance. And as we go up, the more of goodness increases, And as we go lower, because of the consciousness, the mode decreases. So these different modes, they are but a result of our own consciousness. And these are all the variety of species that are provided throughout the universe. So all of them, they are constructed of ingredients. All these uh, humanoid races, or even the animals for that matter. So they are constructed of primarily 5 gross elements, as described in Bhagavad Gita. Bhumir apo nala vayu kham mano buddhi revacha ahamkaram iti yami binna prakriti rastadha. And 3 subtle elements. So we would find that all the people on earth, just like how science says, the body is made up 70% of water. So even Bhagavatam mentions that the human body is made of primarily of water and a little bit of earth, along with the other elements, as compared to the people who come from the planet of sun, who are made of rather more subtle elements like fire, uh, mind, and intelligence. So we need to understand that even though these may be gross elements, but uh, as per their succession, as per where they are placed, one element could be more subtle than the next. So you start with earth, water, fire, air, and then ether, and finally we have mind, intelligence, and ego, and that is usually the hierarchy of all these elements. So these are more subtle beings, and even subtler are those beings in Satyaloka, like Brahma, who's completely made of intelligence, and then the beings of the lower planetary system, who are constructed of subtle elements but also dominated uh, more with grosser elements like uh, mind. But because they are dominated by the subtle element of mind, hence we are unable to see them or perceive them. And even they cannot perceive us, and they cannot perceive the other uh, higher planetary system, because all they see is matter. And this is some information regarding the outer shells of the universe as we are moving out. So this would be our Bhumandala. And as we move inwards, the density of all these elements would increase. And at the same time, as we move outwards, or we are moving backwards in time, so that would be the first outer covering. And we are talking about huge, incredible astronomical size coverings. So where the original size of the Bhumandala is quite reduced. The first layer would be the earth. Second would be water. And third, where there's fire, how Bhagavatam states, or how Prabhupada writes in the purport, it's actually heat. Or and from heat, there's radiation, and that's how you have electricity, because electricity is nothing but free-flowing electrons. So this is also where the stars are formed, where there is some form of electricity. And then here there is gases. So, there is formation of molecules. And there, this space, which is vacuum as such. And then we have the subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and ego. Bhagavatam also describes sometimes there is another layer known as Pradhana, or the Mahatattva. So this is the Brahma Mandala, the golden egg. And it was in Surya Siddhanta that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he kind of put the numbers together to give us the exact thickness or the diameter of this golden egg. And he concluded it to be of a number with 17 zeros. So that would be about a billion. So I wouldn't even care to read it. It's huge. And the thickness, it corresponds with the Milky Way, the extent of the Milky Way galaxy. So that's interesting. If we go beyond that, we have these different universes floated. They're floating around Lord Vishnu, Mahavishnu, Karanadakshai Vishnu. And our universe, which is said to be the smallest amongst all these universes, they're clustered together like bubbles in foams floating in these oceans. So at the time of creation, when Lord glances at Rama Devi, along with his glance, he's impregnating Rama Devi through Lord Shiva, and all these living entities are then sort of selected and given particular bodies by Brahma at the time of creation. This is what it would look like. And all these universes are floating on the causal ocean, which is also the origin for Mother Ganga. Now we are moving beyond this portion of land, and we arrive at this place, Sada Shiva Loka, which is right at the border of the material realm and the unlimited spiritual world. So this is where Lord Shiva is present in his form of Sada Shiva, and he is one of the lower expansions of Lord Krishna. And here he is present with all his associates. And unlike the Shiva that was born from Brahma, or that appears from the eyebrows of Ananta at the time of destruction, and several other Rudras, here is an expansion of Krishna. So he is of the lower expansion, but we cannot consider him to be supreme because he is of a much lower status. And as we move out, there are these clouds that are blocking the effulgence of the spiritual world, clearing all those clouds. We reach the effulgence of the spiritual world. This is the place called Brahma Jyoti. This is the effulgence from the body of the Lord and effulgence from all these planets. And as Arjuna and Krishna, when they were passing this tract of land, Arjuna, he was blinded by this effulgence, so he closed his eyes. So this is the destination for all those people who sought for the Brahman aspect of the Lord, who sort of want to merge in the body of the Lord, who think of themselves as equal to the Lord. They would end up in this space of nothing. They won't be able to perform any activity. They will just be a part of the effulgence, just like staring at the screen. There is no activity whatsoever. This is just a blank screen. There is nothing to do. So eventually what would happen, all these living entities, they would desire to appear back in the material world, because ultimately the original position of all these souls is that they are eternal servants of the Lord. And one of the qualities of all these souls is activity. So that's the dormant nature. One cannot separate one's nature from oneself. So definitely in this state of inactivity, no one would last here. So this is where it is stated that Krishna and Arjuna, they cross the material realms and they meet Mahavishnu. And for all those people who perfect their lives in Krishna consciousness, uh, whatever their destination be, ultimately they all would end up going to the spiritual world if they are perfect devotees of the Lord. And for all of those devotees, the Lord sends down, along with his messengers, this divine aircraft. As you can see, this is an aircraft that was sent from the Vaikuntha planets to take Ajamal. Uh, this is from, I think, Haridwar, where Ajamal spent his last few days perfecting his life. And there are all these beings from uh, the higher heavenly planets who are capable of entering Vaikuntha because they are in their spiritual bodies, like the four Kumaras who reside in Tapaloka. And they try to enter Vaikuntha from the west gate, which is guarded. So there are there are gates in all cardinal directions. And the west gate has these two gatekeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, who block the four Kumaras. So in Vaikuntha, here you can see, as it's described in various verses, here we find the Lord along with all his associates who are having their four-handed forms. They look just like the Lord. And here everyone worships Lord Narayan and Lakshmi Devi with awe and reverence. So there is this hierarchy. There is this level of respect. It's pretty formal, the way of worship, just like how the worship of Tirupati Balaji is conducted, very formal, uh, with awe and reverence. So even in our ISKCON temple, even though we are worshipping Radha and Krishna, Srila Prabhupada was very strict that we must worship the Lord like they are Narayan and Lakshmi Devi, with awe and reverence. So there is no personal interaction, maybe with the close associates, but all the people in these realms, they can see the Lord. So this is the Lord uh, as he welcomes the four Kumaras. So you can see all these associates, they look exactly like Lord Narayan. And there are different uh, planetary systems where you have all these different Vaikuntha planets where the Lord is present in different forms uh, as per the desire of the devotee. He can go to all these planets and reside there with the Lord. And moving further, we have Ayodhya, where you have Lord Ram, who personally lives with all his associates. So unlike what people generally see, that Lord Ram may appear to be bluish, but actually, as per the Vedic literature and the Puranas, and as per Ramayana, uh, Lord Ram, he has this hue of light green. He's greenish in complexion. Uh, he looks almost like the pista. This is Lord Ram. So all those uh, who are great devotees of Lord Ram and who want to associate with Lord Ram and they desire to experience life of Ayodhya, this would be their destination. So for those who fancy how the place looks like, here is an image. Now, going further, we come to the planets, to this planet of Dwaraka, where Lord Krishna is present. So here we have the Dwarka Dham. And here Krishna, he lives like a king with all uh, his yadus. And as you can see, this is very opulent. One of the most best paintings that I've seen. All these beings of Dwarka. And here Krishna lives like a king. So it's a bit informal compared to Vaikuntha, as in all the associates, close associates of the Lord can interact with him personally. But if you're just one of the common citizens, so your chances of interacting with the Lord would be quite less, as it was stated in the accounts of Gopakumar. Because much of the details that we have of the heavenly, not the heavenly, the spiritual world, they come from Gopakumar. So Gopakumar happens to be one of the devotees who has recorded his entire journey from earth to the spiritual world. And he gives illustrations and descriptions about all these spiritual planets. So here, when he went to Dwarka, he was just a common citizen. So he could only be present in the palace when all the citizens were invited to see Lord Krishna. So he could only see Krishna from a distance, but he couldn't personally interact with Krishna. Here you can see Krishna in the evenings. He likes to spend time with all the members of the palace, and he appears in several forms, as you can see. Here Krishna is appearing in one palace, there in another, and even there, and even there. So the Lord is present in all these palaces, and he's spending time with all his devotees. So those of y'all who want to be queens of Krishna, so y'all can meditate upon this picture. Certainly one day the desire may be fulfilled. As we move further, we reach this land known as Purushottam Kshetra or Jagannath Puri. So on the call, I don't know if I'm not sure, but I think on the call today we have Machinder Prabhu. So he happens to be one of the great devotees of Jagannath. He keeps planning trips to Jagannath Puri. And this is that same place where Krishna, Balaram, and Subhadra, they're present in their most merciful form of Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra mind. They are said to be the most merciful forms of the Lord, and they are even said to be deities meant to be worshipped in Kali Yuga along with God Nitai. They're very merciful deities. And the Lord is said to glance, by his glance he's liberating all the souls. Yeah, you will find the actual deity of Jagannath doesn't have eyebrows because he doesn't want to close his eyes and miss the opportunity of not seeing a devotee. So he doesn't have eyebrows. And there he's viewing all these devotees. It is said in some instances that even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sometimes appears in this tract of land and he dances in front of Lord Jagannath in the spiritual realm. And next, as we move upwards, we have this Mathura, where Lord is residing with all his family members. Again, almost like a king with Balaram. They are almost gentleman-like or statesmen in this picture, and as well as in all these realms. So that could be a description of Mathura for all of y'all. Very beautiful. One of the features of all these spiritual planets is that there are innumerable Lakshmis, there are innumerable gopis, and there is no dust. This place isn't affected by time. The Kala Chakra isn't there in this portion of land. So this is very beautiful. Now finally, when we move to the innermost region and the most highest level of the spiritual realm, Goloka Vrindavan. So any devotee who enters Goloka is personally greeted by the Lord, and the Lord welcomes you. He says, "Oh, you must have had a long journey. Welcome, finally, I've been waiting for you." Just like how the Lord greeted Gopakumar. The moment he saw Gopakumar, he left everything and he ran towards Gopakumar and he embraced him. And he started telling him, "Where were you? I was looking for you all this while." So this is how the Lord is looking forward to seeing all of us. So here, for those who desire to have personal relationships with the Lord, in Madhurya Ras or in Sakhya Ras, friendship, so these would be the appropriate destination where the Lord is, He's forever, He's present and He's performing pastimes in the form of a 16-year-old boy. So in Vrindavan, in Goloka Vrindavan, the Lord is never in His form as a child. So only when the Lord descends into the material world, He has His childhood pastimes. But in the spiritual realm, He's always ever youthful, like a 16-year-old boy. And so are all the denizens. So all the inhabitants here, they have only one occupation, and that is to engage in bringing the Lord closer to Srimati Radharani and making arrangements for all that to happen. You can also hang out with Balaram. Here is Balaram. I think he's chastising Yamuna. I don't know what she did. And then sometimes Krishna, he takes a form of a gopi and he plays pranks on Radharani. There's various pastimes that goes on there. So here the Lord is, He interacts with everyone in a more personal level. You can talk to the Lord. You can even fight with the Lord or even beat the Lord. And the Lord happily accepts it. And it's said that one portion of Goloka Vrindavan happens to be Navadvip, or Navadvip is even said to come before Goloka Vrindavan. And this is the region where the Lord is present in His form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where He's in a guise of a devotee. But over here in Navadvip or Shvetadvip, He fully becomes the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But in this golden form, He's interacting with all His devotees. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is very merciful and he's constantly engaged in performing kirtans for years and years. So this, for all of us who are familiar with kirtans and who are familiar with the Harinam, the chanting, so this would be a very nice place to be, because one is having experiencing rasas which are even more higher than the ones in Goloka with the Lord. So it is said that there are the rasas of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which are comprised in the 10th canto. There are the rasas of the rasa dance, which happens, which is pretty confidential. But even more confidential from that are the rasas of all these, the Chaitanya Leela. So here the Lord, along with Nityanand Prabhu, he is interacting with all his devotees. This is Srivas Angan in Navadvip, where they are performing kirtan for hours and hours. And these are the primary personalities that are present. To quickly introduce everyone, here, right in the middle, is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Lord Krishna himself, with the potency of Radharani. That is why he's golden in complexion. Here is Nityanand Prabhu, who is also the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's an expansion of Balaram. Then we have Advaita Acharya, who is an expansion of Mahavishnu and also an expansion of Sadashiva. Here we have Gadadhar Pandit, who is an expansion of Radharani. And finally we have Srivas Pandit, who is Narada Muni. So here devotees can experience the highest levels of ecstasies. There are different forms of ecstasies that have been described in the Nectar of Devotion. And it is said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was present on earth, he would display all these ecstasies. One of which was when he was chanting the names of the Lord, he would become so ecstatic that tears would flow from his eyes, but not like ordinary tears of how we would cry with just droplets of tears. Here, tears would shoot out from his eyes to all the people surrounding him like syringes. Just imagine if you have a syringe filled with water and then you just spurt it out. So that would be the effect of the ecstasy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would sometimes be able to cross through narrow spaces. He would compress himself to the size of a sheet and pass through a door, or sometimes disappear in ecstasy. So here are the different ecstasies of the Lord, and as I said, these are very confidential. So as we are discussing Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, as we get advanced in this process of learning, then eventually we would reach Chaitanya Charitamrita, where there are such details of the Lord. And the Lord, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is so beautiful. His hands are said to extend, even they're longer, up to his knees. And he's very tall with broad shoulders, and he's golden in complexion. The most merciful form of the Lord, even more merciful than Lord Krishna. This is a Panihati festival. And all the demigods, they pray for an opportunity where they can have a chance to associate with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this entire Gaura Arti that we sing in the evening is actually a description of the demigods worshipping Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there is, in Chaitanya Bhagavat, while I was reading, there's this instance where Indra is said to share his personal experience. He's saying that I've been cursed to have thousands of eyes all over my body. It kind of disfigures, it kind of looks ugly. But this curse has transformed into a boon, because with these 1,000 eyes, I'm glancing at the beautiful form of the Lord while he's dancing with all his associates in the Sankirtan. So this is an opportunity which the Lord, which all the demigods are dying to experience. And we worship the most merciful forms of Gauranga and Nityananda. As you all have seen in our altar, we have two deities. And these are the most, these are deities of the highest entities. Gauranga and Nityananda were expansions of Krishna and Balaram, most merciful. So at this point of time, as all of us have finally reached Goloka, so at this point of time, we have fully described, at least to some extent, all the length and breadth of the universe, as well as details of planets and worlds beyond the material world, even the aspects of the spiritual world. So now that we all know this, the understanding of cosmology is meant to make us aware of where we come from, and who we are and where we are supposed to go. So now that we understand this, so we may be able to make better decisions in life, in choosing certain activities in order to select a destination which is more favorable for all of us. So now that I've described everything for you all can decide where you would like to visit. So this is formally the end of the lecture. I have this one small portion. If we have just 5 minutes, I would quickly like to run through this last portion of the lecture, which is the moon landing from the Vedic perspective, as I promised to touch on this aspect. So, as we all know, in 1969, there were the Apollo missions, or 60s, early 60s or late 60s, I'm not sure. There were these Apollo missions where 6 crew members were sent on to the moon planet, as they recall. So of course, we are not interested in the machines that were sent to the planet, because the machines are only designed to show what they're made of. But there were humans that were sent there. And humans, unlike machines, are also made of subtle elements, which help them perceive something beyond what they're supposed to. So it's not just us, there are also many people out there who kind of think that the moon, the missions to the moon are kind of controversial. Yeah, as I was in university, we were studying these papers of propaganda that was spread from United States to Russia. There was always a competition for who's going to be a superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there was this constant power struggle. So certain propagandas were spread as theories, just to convince one or the other state. So this is almost like politics that has been played at such fronts, almost like a war, information warfare, through the propaganda of the moon landing. So at this point, let us just not completely reject the idea of them not going to the moon, but rather let's just give them the benefit of doubt. Have they or have they not gone to the moon? So many people, they think that the moon missions were filmed in a studio. And as all these pictures were published, there were all these questions of, if you're in space, where are all the stars? And we all know through modern science itself that moon is about 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So all these people who are living in the Earth planet, if they happen to go to moon, then scientifically they should all be floating. And how are they able to move around in these so-called rovers? So all these kind of contradictions and questions came up. And this big question of how are we capable of going to the moon with a technology as primitive as the times of 1960s. So common people don't really understand or they can't perceive such distances. They can't understand or comprehend. So what would the distance between the Earth and the Moon look like? And they would perceive something like this. But actually, it is like that. An average of about 240,000 miles. And that is about the orbit of the International Space Station, about 250 miles roughly. And there were 6 crew journeys. And how is it that they had absolutely no problem with the 1960 technology? Is a big question. So as the moon landings were being telecast, Srila Prabhupada is he happened to see them. And all these pictures were published of the moon being a grey desert with craters. So Srila Prabhupada, he mentions in one of the purports that since the moon god is a presiding deity of vegetation, there must be vegetation on the moon. And yet the scientists say it's a barren desert. And as described earlier, the Vedic white moon is situated in third status of the upper planetary system. The first being all the heavenly realms within the earth, then the sun, and finally the moon. So we all know this. So naturally, as per Bhagavatam, it should be a place of vegetation, it should be a place of life, it should be occupied with citizens drinking somaras. So this is one excerpt of an interview where the reporter is asking, how would you describe these people that live there? Would they be invisible to us or visible? Prabhupada said, almost invisible, yes. And Haigriva, like ghost bodies, subtle bodies? Prabhupada said, yes. So, another purport from the second canto. This is the time when the United States was kind of selling land on the moon. So it's quite funny. So they say they're creating a great commotion about reaching the closest celestial body, Chandraloka or the moon. But even after such mechanical research, they have only very scanty information of this moon. And in spite of much false advertisement for selling land on the moon, the puffed up scientists or gross materialists cannot live there. And what to speak of reaching other planets, which are unable to even count. And then in the first canto, he is giving this purpose. Some are trying to reach the moon by some mechanical arrangement, but that's not going to happen. Different places are meant for different grades of life according to the work that they perform. And in the 8th canto, he describes Indra, the king of the higher planetary system, has a power to push down any conditioned soul who's attempting to go from the lower to the higher planets without proper qualifications. And the modern attempt to go to the moon is also an attempt by inferior men to go to Swargaloka by artificial mechanical means. This attempt cannot be successful. There is a mention of this king called Trishanku, who along with his associates was meditating and trying to push his body through meditation to the Swargaloka. And as he was seated in this posture, the yoga posture, and he was ascending to the heavenly realms, Indra tricked him and kind of turned his body upside down and pushed him to the southern planetary system, the south. So you would find this, I didn't have the time to put the image, but you all can go and search for this cross constellation in the southern hemisphere. So it is said that Trishanku, along with all his associates, was sent to the lower constellations by Indra. So certainly, even all these astronauts who plan to go there, to the moon planet, So Indra, he kind of tricks them and instead sends them to another planet. So here we introduce Rahu. So Rahu does not reflect any light from the earth. So Srila Prabhupada states here. So in other words, those who are supposed to be going to the moon are not going to the moon but to the planet Rahu. And Rahu is said to be the master of deception, mystery and illusion. And so someone was curious enough to kind of plot the astrological charts of that particular day and time when when the moon landing took place from Washington. And here it is said that the black moon Lilith represents the dark side of one's personality related to falsehood, cheating, and primitive impulses. So one can ask, so does that mean going to Rahu represents a demoniac mentality of faking the moon landing? It's an interesting thing to meditate on. So, well, let's just entertain the possibility that what the probes and satellites see of the moon is the surface of Rahu. So the specific differences of the celestial moon and Rahu from Vedic perspective are as follows. That the Rahu Mandala is situated about 10,000 yojanas below the level of the sun's path. So this would be the Bhumandala as described in Bhugol Varnanam. And as we zoom in to that position, there we find the position of Rahu was about 80,000 miles or 10,000 yojanas below the orbit of the Earth. And I wouldn't say orbit, the plane of the Earth. And there would be Ketu. So Ketu is responsible for the lunar eclipse and Rahu is responsible for the solar eclipse. In the light of Bhagavad, Srila Prabhupada writes that to reach the moon, it is first necessary to cross the Manasa lake and the Sumeru mountains. So this would be our journey from the earth to the moon. But as even shown in this diagram, one can see that the physical distance between the earth and the moon, as well as the earth and Rahu, they kind of coincide. They're actually the same, but the vertical distance is quite different. So that is something that the scientists cannot take into account because they don't have this knowledge. And if you take the vertical distance into account, it would end up being a really long interstellar travel, which is impossible for modern scientists and astronauts. So Srila Prabhupada said to a reporter that the inhabitants of the moon would be almost invisible. And to back that, we have the material as discussed from which the gross body of all the people on earth is made of. But interestingly, the ingredients for all the bodies in all these higher planets are the 5 pranas: mind, intellect, memory, and ego. So with such subtle ingredients, one cannot perceive these beings. So whenever you point your telescope to the Chandraloka, although you're pointing it to the moon, but actually you will only get to see the 2-dimensional version of the moon, which is Rahu. So even though you're looking at moon, you won't get to perceive the Chandraloka. You will only perceive the Rahu. So people have sort of zoomed in on these various craters and they kind of call this like civilizations. So Prabhupada says perhaps these are civilizations of Rakshasas and Yakshas and Daityas who live on the Rahu planet. So this brings us to the conclusion of the 3-day session of the Vedic Cosmology. And I give credit to Srila Prabhupada and all his disciples who put together all this information for us and made it palatable for all of us to understand, along with the disciples of Prabhupada by the names of Danveer Goswami Maharaj, Sadaput Prabhu, Dr. Richard L. Thompson, Antardweep Prabhu, Radha Damodar Maharaj, Swarup Damodar Maharaj, and various other people who are involved in this project. And they're also trying to construct this Vedic planetarium where there will be descriptions and explanations, and they will try to display the planet, the universe, the material world, as well as the spiritual world, the entire Vedic cosmology, through a chandelier that would be hanging from the dome. So that's about it that I have to share. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Sanjay Prabhu, Amit here. No words, Sanjay Prabhu. I think the question